This
is Woodside Kids.
That was fun. Welcome back, everybody, to Woodside Kids. My name is Zach.Payne, and I'm glad you're here today. Now, we've been talking all about how God made you a unique you. The first week we talked about Joseph and how sometimes people aren't going to get you, and that's okay. Then we talked about a guy called Moses and how sometimes you think you can't, but God knows you can. And this week we're going to be talking about how God made you a unique you, but sometimes you have to be brave. Now, being brave does not mean not being scared. In fact, sometimes being brave means that you're scared and you do what you're supposed to do anyway. And that's what real bravery is. Please excuse me, I had to throw a ball at my cat. Now, the cat's called Rupert, and he was scratching at a couch, but that's okay. See Rupert here? Anyway, like I was saying, thank you all for being here. And before we get into our story today, I've just got one question for you. Can you follow the coin? Welcome back to another Follow the Coin. I'm your host, Zach, and this week I'm going to be using the same coin I was doing last week, but I've been keeping it up here. I don't know if you can see it very well. Let me show you. Rupert, he thinks he sees it. Do you see it, Rupert? Oh, wow. Okay, now again, this is an American 50-cent piece, and it's nice and shiny, so you should be able to follow it really easily. So your job today is to let me know if you can follow the coin. And what's fun about these 50-cent pieces is that you can drop them, but then sometimes if you get it just right, they can jump back up the other way. So it's like an anti-gravity coin. But we're not here for anti-gravity coins. We're here to see if you can follow the coin. So we're going to do that now. So first up, it's over here, or is it? It's not. I don't know where it was. It was over here. That's where it was. So pay close attention because this happens very quickly. Ha! Did I get you? Did you follow the coin? Were you tricked by my looking over here when it was actually over there? I don't know. But if you see it here, oh, I don't know what's going on with this thing. It's sometimes hard to follow. Like, I'll try it one more time. Did it work? Did you follow the coin? I don't know. Can you see it over there? I found it. I found it. I found it over there. Okay, last one. I promise. I don't promise, actually. I could keep going. Who knows? But you think it's there, but it's not. You know why? Because this is a magical coin, and the magical coin jumps all the way over there. Isn't that crazy? Okay. Now, my wife, Lindsay, she wanted me to do one more thing. And I'm trying to remember what it was. If only I could remember. I think she wanted to see it go like this, and then I drop it down like that. Is that what she wanted to see? She's nodding her head. That wasn't what she wanted to see, but it'll work anyway. Anyway, have a nice day, everybody. I hope you were able to follow the coin. Welcome back. Were you able to follow the coin? I hope that you were. If not, that's okay. There'll be more opportunities next time. Also, before I get into the story, I've got one question. Do you remember our Bible verse? Our memory verse? The Bible verse from the memory that we've been working on for the last 3 weeks? Do you remember it? It goes something like this. For we are God's masterpiece. He created us anew in Christ Jesus to do the good things that He planned for us long ago. Ephesians 2:10. Do you remember that? Because I haven't gotten any videos of you guys doing it yet, and I'm starting to think that you guys don't have very good memories. So I would love to see those videos of you doing the Bible verse in Ephesians 2:10. Ask your mommy or daddy to record you and send it in to me at Zach.Payne@woodsidechurch.com. Now, we're going to get right into the story, which is God made you a unique you, and sometimes you gotta be brave. Welcome back to another Bible lesson today. Again, my name is Zach, and I'm so glad that you could be here. Now, we're talking about how God made you a unique you. We started off by first talking about a guy called Joseph and how his brothers and other people, they didn't get him, but that was okay. And so God made you a unique you, and sometimes people aren't going to get you, but that's okay. And then we talked about Moses and how he had a stutter and he was afraid to talk and he didn't think he could do it, but God knew that he could. And that's just like you. God made you a unique you, and when you think you can't, God thinks you can. And today we're going to be talking about a guy called Gideon and how he had to be brave. And that's just as true for you. God made you a unique you, and sometimes you have to be brave. Now, this Bible story is from a book called Judges. So, the Bible is made up of 66 different books. And some of them are letters, some of them are stories, some of them are poetry, some of them have a whole lot of wisdom in them. And it's just chock-a-block full of everything you could ever want to know or to think about or whatever, but it's great. So in this one, it's called Judges. And so I'm just going to give you a brief history. So once upon a time, there were these people called the Israelites, and they were slaves of Egypt. Moses came and set them all free, and then he led them into the wilderness on the way to the promised land, and they had to stay there for 40 years. That's a long time. So 40 years later, they finally got to the promised land. And after that, nobody had a king, and they didn't know what to do. And so the way that God did that was he sent people to be the judges, is what they call. That's why the book is called Judges, and it's all about all of these different judges. And you know what a judge is, right? They're the people that make the rules and decide who's good, or what's good, what's bad. And so these were God-appointed judges. And Gideon was one of those guys. Now, imagine, if you will, these people were living in their home, and then all of these invaders came in, and they were like, hey, give us your home. Hey, that bread that you're eating, spit it out. I want that bread. And then they eat the bread right out of your mouth, and it's gross. So these people were living underneath this really bad guy's, really bad people's rule. And so they were crying out to God and saying, God, help us, please. So God showed up and appeared to a guy called Gideon, and that's where this story is going to start. So Gideon, the son of Josiah, was threshing wheat at the bottom of a winepress to hide from the Midianites. So he was hiding from the baddies, and God showed up underneath a tree. And so the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, mighty hero, the Lord is with you. So how would you like it if you were hiding and afraid and if it's scared that anybody would see you, and somebody showed up and they said, hey, you mighty hero, you're going to do great things and God is with you? I don't know if I would believe it. And Gideon, he didn't believe it either. So Gideon said, hey, if God is with us, then why is all of this bad stuff happening? And that's a really good question. But God doesn't mind you asking hard questions. And so God says to him, hey, you, go with your strength, and you're going to set your people free, because I am sending you. And so that's what God told him. He said, hey, you're going to do this. I'm sending you. I made you a unique you, and you're going to go out and use your strength that I gave you to set your people free. And so Gideon, he says to him, oh, how can I do that? My clan, my family is the weakest of all of the families, and I am the weakest of all of my family. So he's the weakest of the weakest and the weakest of the weakest. That's pretty weak. But God said to him, I will be with you. Whew. I don't know about you, but that gets me pumped up. But Gideon, he still wasn't convinced. So he said to God, he said, hey, if you're really sending me, show me a sign to prove that it's you. I'm going to go get you an offering, some food, and you just stay here till I get back. So I like to imagine that he went home and he was like, Mom, Dad, I just ran into God out there and he says that I'm supposed to go set people free and I don't know what to do, and so I'm stalling right now. And then his mom and dad were like, what are you doing? If God's out there waiting for you, go shoo. And so he's like, okay, but I gotta make a meal first. And so he gets some flour and he mixes it with water and he rolls the flour and and puts it in the oven, and then he sets a timer for 25 minutes, and then he goes and sits down, and he's like, oh man, I hope that guy is gone by the time I get back, because I really don't want to do this. I'm scared. So he sits down, and then the timer goes ding, and the bread's done. He goes, takes it out. That's good bread. And then he goes and he gets some meat, and he's like, oh, this is raw meat. I gotta cook this meat. And he sets a timer for 3 hours because he's gonna do a slow cooker roast just to make sure that he's got plenty of time. You know, he's leaving that guy out there because he asked him to stay if he was really from God. And so he just sits there and he sets the timer for 3 hours, and he's like, oh man, I hope that guy is gone. I really, really don't want to do that. So he makes this really nice meal, and it takes him all afternoon. That's not in the Bible. This is just the way that I imagine it. And then so he comes out there, and he's walking, and he's like, yeah, that guy's gone. And then he looks up at the tree where God was before he left, and he sees him there, and he goes, oh no. Well, that's not a sign yet. That's not a sign. That's what Gideon thinks to himself. So he goes and he cooks a goat and some flour and bakes some bread, and then he carries the meat in a basket, and he makes some broth in a pot, and he goes back under that oak tree. And the angel of God was still there and said, hey, put that meat there and the bread over there, and then pour that broth over top of it. So Gideon did all of that, and then the angel of God touched the meat and the bread, and a flame burst from the rock and consumed all that he had brought, and then God disappeared. Now, that's a pretty cool thing, and I don't know about you, but Gideon asked for a sign, and that seemed like a sign. So that night, Gideon, he's encouraged. He says, yeah, that was God. And he goes out, and he does what God tells him to do. He tears down an idol of a bad god, and he says, ha ha, I got you. But then he goes back to being afraid, and he hides. And all of these people come out, and they said, hey, it was Gideon who did this. And Gideon's like, no, hang on, guys, it wasn't me. But then this is where we come back, because even though he had just had a sign from God and he did what God told him to do, the very next day, Gideon says to God, if you are really gonna use me to rescue Israel as you promised, prove it to me in this specific way. I'm gonna put some wool out on the threshing floor tonight, and if the fleece is wet in the morning and the rest of the ground is dry, then I will know that you're going to help me the way that you said you would. So Gideon put out some fleece, like wool or like a sponge. Oh, this is a fun experiment. Get a sponge and see how wet you can get your sponge, and see if the next day it'll be dry and everything else be wet. So Gideon wakes up and he goes to the fleece and he squeezes out the sponge, and it filled up a whole bowl of water. Man, that's a wet sponge. But Gideon, he wasn't ready yet. He didn't want to do this. He was really, really, really scared. And so he says to God, please don't be angry with me, but just one more request. This time, the next morning, why don't you make the fleece dry and the rest of the ground wet? How about that, God? Could you do that for me? So, that night, God did as Gideon asked. And the fleece was dry, the sponge was dry, but the rest of the ground was soaking wet. So Gideon got up early the next morning, and he went to face the armies of the enemies. So, this is about a hero. This is somebody that is written about in the Bible. And he was so scared that he first left God waiting underneath an oak tree to go and prepare an entire meal, and then came back to him, hoping that God would leave. And then still, after that, after getting the fire, eating up all of the food, after that, he still wasn't convinced, and he still wasn't ready. And you know what he did? He went and he was like, okay, God, this is a sponge. Don't let the ground be wet, but just let the sponge be wet. And then the sponge was wet. And he knew at that point, this is probably God, but just in case, now do the opposite, God, because I really don't want to do this. I'm scared. And the opposite happened, just like he asked. And finally, Gideon had the courage and was brave enough to do what God was asking him to do. And sometimes God might ask you to do something, and it might be scary. He might say, hey, you need to stop hanging out with that friend. Or, hey, you're going to move away with your family, and it's going to be hard. But you can do it. And you have to be brave, because God made you a unique you, and sometimes you have to be brave. And it's okay to be afraid sometimes. But just remember, just like God said to Gideon, He is with you. So that's the story of Gideon and how it's okay to be scared, but to be brave. See you next week.